I'm actually so stoked people are here today because I feel like this is going to be the best sermon of my life, but it's not because I actually did a good job preparing. It's because the content is so good from this book I read called Shaped by the Gospel by Tim Keller. Okay, so anyway, the point of today is that it's really easy to miss Jesus, right? I mean, you could, dude, we live in a culture where they celebrate Christmas and Easter, and we can miss Jesus. We see crosses all over the place, people wear crosses, cross neck. I mean, if you think about it, even this week, try to count how many people wear cross necklaces, and it's just one. It's like there are multiple people that wear, and it's just like you see it everywhere. Or people say the name Jesus Christ probably 20 times a week. You'll probably hear whatever. You hear and see Jesus-related stuff all the time. But it's so easy to miss Jesus, even despite just how prolific Jesus stuff is in our culture, right? Okay, so I grew up in a Christian home. My parents, by some miracle, it was just an act of God. My parents they weren't Christian when they got married, and my mom just all of a sudden had this idea in her head, I think we need to go to church. And my dad was like, okay. And then so, fortunately, there was a church relatively close to our home, and my parents became Christians through the ministry of this church. And my dad just was awakened one day because the pastor was saying, hey, what it's like not being a Christian is you just kind of feel like you're drowning. You just can't get your head above water. It's just, it's hard, And so he's like, yeah, I feel like that. So my dad became a Christian. My mom was like, that sounds cool too, because you're a lot different, so now I'm going to become a Christian. So they both became Christians. It was cool. Before I was born, I think right before I was born, it was pretty crazy. So anyway, I grew up in a Christian home, but I also grew up in an area that was not particularly Christian. There aren't that many Christians in this part of LA that I lived in. So anyway, I grew up in the church. I heard about Jesus. But to be honest, Jesus for me was not that important. God was the guy I prayed to when I needed an A on my bio test. And I remember actually my freshman year praying before my bio test and sitting there and just like, Lord, give me this A on this test. Remember my teacher was like, yeah, okay, you can pray, that's fine, And so I just remember there have been moments where I've prayed just for success. I remember praying and reading my Bible, but that was only before a cello competition or something like that. It was, God was there to give me what I wanted when I felt like it, but otherwise, I had zero interest in an actual relationship with God. I didn't really know what that was like. I just kind of thought I was already a Christian. So if you ask me, David, are you a Christian? I would say, yeah, I go to church. And that's actually what happened because there have been a couple points in my life where I feel like God was starting to rock my boat a little bit. And one of which was in middle school, and this one guy, he was confrontation was kind of a strong word, but it was pretty direct. And he was saying, yeah, David, do you care about this? And I was like, nah. And he's like, well, don't you think you should? He was kind of pressing a little bit, right? And I was like, whatever, I don't want to have this conversation right now. But I remember that affected me. I was like, yeah, I guess maybe I don't really care about this. And then when I was in high school, this guy named John, he was our small group leader, and he was leading a Bible study outside of the youth group. And he's like, hey, my name's John. I'm leading a Bible study in the book of John. And do you want to be a part of it? It's like, okay, yeah, that sounds great. And so he's like, yeah, but are you a Christian? I said, well, yeah, I go to church. And he's like, well, that doesn't make you a Christian. And I was like, wait, what? And I think in the moment, I didn't want to look bad. So I said something like, oh, well, but yeah, you're right. Okay, yeah, but I kind of fudged it after. It was kind of making it seem like, oh, I really was a Christian. I wasn't really affected by what he just said. But I was affected by what he said because that was my answer. If you ask me, David, are you a Christian? I'd say, yeah. It's because of my church attendance, right? But I realized that I wasn't a Christian. And I think the most obvious time that was when we were talking about grace in our Bible study. And we were talking about, as a Christian, we have grace. And I was like, what is grace? I didn't know what that was, which is the unmerited, unearned favor of God. And I just didn't know what that meant. I was like, Well, I thought like a Christian was just like you just do good stuff and live a moral life, you know? I thought that's what Christianity was. And then I learned that we all fall short of the glory of God, and therefore we need forgiveness. We need grace. And I was like, oh, that's kind of different, you know? And so there was a point actually where I just started reading the Bible. I just started reading the Bible, and I was like, man, like I really don't understand this Jesus. This is like probably summer of junior year or something like that. And yeah, I just like, I actually just really felt like I didn't know Jesus. I was reading the part in the Sermon on the Mount where Jesus says people are going to come to him and he's going to say, I never knew you. And it's like, what if that's me? What if I'm the one who's like, dude, like I'm that person who would say, I know you, Jesus. And he's going to be like, I don't know you. I was like, how do I make sure that doesn't happen? Because I really don't want that to happen. You know, if I have enough time on this planet to get that right, I don't want to find out when I can't fix it later that is my destiny. You know what I mean? So I was like, man, I really got to figure this out. It's kind of a big deal, right? When we're talking about eternity. But what was so cool is one night I remember praying, and I prayed, and I was like, God, I'm sorry. If you can give me a second chance, I'm sorry, Lord, and I'm going to just trust in Jesus for my salvation instead of just trying to be a good person, right? And it was so crazy. Like the next day, I had a lust problem where I would check out girls and they just couldn't stop. But I remember we were at orientation for school, and there's something in me that wasn't cool with that anymore. I mean, there was something in me that was like fighting against that tendency. I was like, why did I become, another sexuality here? What happened to me? Because I'm a little it's like, what's going on? But what was in me was, I still remain heterosexual, but it was just, I didn't like the objectification of women. I was like, am I gay? No, just like, I didn't, that's what I didn't think that, but that's kind of like, what's going on in me, right? So there was something different about me. But then it was also the case, I was such a good liar. I was a pathological liar. The reason why is because I cared about my image and didn't want people to think down on me. So I'd lie about myself and say how great I was. And then what happened was people would catch me in my lies, right? And then, so I actually couldn't talk anymore. I actually was so conflicted in my heart to talk. And people would be like, oh yeah, like, how is this? I'd be like I had so much discomfort trying to white lie anymore. I really had a hard time. I couldn't obviously lie, but even the white lie kind of stuff, is like, it would trip me up to even try to get out of my mouth. I just couldn't talk anymore. So I had to relearn how to talk for a while. But anyway, it was so cool just to have that crazy transformation, and like a bunch of other stuff have been progressive as well. But it was for me it was real now. Prayer was real, and when I read the Bible, it was like, this means something to me now. Prayer matters. I actually want a relationship with God. My heart was different. I actually cared about people. Before, it was like, how can I use you for my advantage? It was like a transactional kind of love, right? It's like, oh, I'll do this for you, but you have to do this for me. But then later, it's like God just changes you. You become a new person, right? So anyway, I like this. Why didn't I have this earlier? I felt like I missed Jesus, right? And I think what's so unfortunate is that even though we're in a culture that has remnants of Christianity, it's still so easy to miss Jesus, right? So let's take a look at John chapter 7 in your Bible. And then John 7, verse 25. So why don't you head over there? Okay. So let's take a look at chapter 7, verse 25. Okay. So at that point, some of the people of Jerusalem began to ask, isn't this the man they are trying to kill? Here he is speaking publicly, and they are not saying a word to him. Have the authorities really concluded that he is the Messiah? But we know where this man is from. When the Messiah comes, no one will know where he is from. Then Jesus, still teaching in the temple courts, cried out, yes, you know me, and you know where I am from. I am not here on my own authority, but he who sent me is true. You do not know him, but I know him, because I am from him, and he sent me. Okay. So a little context from the message last week. Jesus is at this festival called the Feast of Tabernacles, or Booths. And you can think of it as like an American holiday. It could be like, Brandon mentioned July 4th, or you can think of it as like Thanksgiving. It's basically like a holiday to remember the good old days of God's provision, okay? So here, Jesus has been explaining the kingdom, but it's interesting here because at this point, the people are like, I thought maybe this is the person they're trying to kill, but they're not doing anything to him. So if they're not trying to kill him, then are they on board with the fact that he's the Messiah? So there's a lot of confusion now because they're like, so if that guy's a criminal, shouldn't he go to jail or we punish him? But for whatever reason, they're not touching him. So they're like, what's going on with this? We're a little confused. We're conflicted. And then they're saying, well, we know where the Messiah is. We know about the Messiah's origins. And their tradition was, we are not supposed to know where the Messiah comes. There is this tradition that like he was supposed to be born in Bethlehem, but they're not really supposed to know much more about his origins. So what's interesting is that even though they're saying we don't know his origins, it's ironic because Jesus was from Nazareth, which was a pretty obscure town. So in a sense, they are saying like he is the Messiah because they don't really know where he's from, right? So then Jesus is saying, he's trying to make it a heavenly thing. So he's saying, I'm here basically because the Father sent me. I know him. He sent me. So he's constantly trying to point people to the fact that he is the Son of God, and he's saying, I'm from heaven. You're of the earth. I'm kind of like an alien, and you're just from around here. But like I have a message for you. I have authority that God gave me. So Jesus has very like heavy statements. Like no human being talks like that. Like, hey, I'm from heaven. I got a message for you. You better listen to it. No one talks like that. Yeah, especially when Jesus is saying, I'm from heaven, right? Okay. So let's go on to the next part. It's verse 30 to 34. So at this, they tried to seize him, but no one laid a hand on him because his hour had not yet come. Still, many in the crowd believed in him. They said, when the Messiah comes, he will perform more signs than, will he perform more signs than this man? The Pharisees heard the crowd whispering such things about him. Then the chief priests and the Pharisees sent temple guards to arrest him. Jesus said, I am with you for only a short time, and then I'm going to the one who sent me. You will look for me, but you will not find me, and where I am, you cannot come. All right, so it's interesting because they tried to seize him, and then I don't know if Jesus was like, we don't really know like how he evaded them, but it's interesting because maybe they had the desire to seize him, but no one just made a move, kind of like back when Jesus is preaching in his hometown in Nazareth, and he's on the cliffside, and it says they're trying to push him off the cliff and kill him, and somehow he like weaves through them. So it's hard to say what that scene looked like, other than the fact that maybe they were a little frozen, and then Jesus kind of like evaded them. We don't really know like what's going on, but for whatever reason, it says that his hour had not yet come. So in the book of John, it's whenever it says his hour had not yet come, it's constantly pointing towards his act on the cross of dying for us. Okay, so that's the hour that it's referring to. Okay, so then people are like, well, okay, this dude's been doing a lot of signs. Like a lot of signs. So if this guy isn't the Messiah, then what's the Messiah going to look like? Because this dude's been doing a whole lot. We've actually never seen a guy do this many miracles, right? I mean, their all-star back in the day was like Elijah. So people made a lot about Elijah, and Elijah was a pretty cool dude, right? But at the same time, Jesus is just like killing it, and he's making Elijah look like a nobody. And people are like, so if this guy is the Messiah, then who's the Messiah, right? So they're curious, right? Okay, so here's the interesting part. The Pharisees are hearing this, and the Pharisees are the leading elite religious rulers of the day for Judaism. And they don't get along with Jesus. They're actually the primary enemies of Jesus, ironically, which you wouldn't expect. But they're going to send temple guards to arrest him. So Jesus is saying, hey, I'm only going to hang out with you guys for a little bit, and you're going to try to look for me, but you're not going to find me, like hide and seek. Okay, so let's go on to the next part. It says, the Jews said to one another, this is verse 35, where does this man intend to go that we cannot find him? Will he go where our people live scattered among the Greeks and teach the Greeks? What did he mean when he said, you will look for me, but you will not find me, and where I am, you cannot come? On the last and greatest day of the festival, Jesus stood and said with a loud voice, let anyone who is thirsty come to me and drink. Whoever believes in me, as Scripture has said, rivers of living water will flow from within him. By this he meant the Spirit whom those who believed in him were later to receive. Up to that time, the Spirit had not yet been given, since Jesus had not yet been glorified. Okay, so the Jews are saying, okay, so Jesus is like, I'm just going to be around you for a little bit and I'm going to leave. And so the people are like, well, does that mean he's going to go to like the other Jewish people in the Greek nations? Like it's called the diaspora, which just means like the scattering. So in other words, not all the Jews are in this area. The Jewish people are scattered throughout the nation. So, they're in different parts of the Mediterranean and in a lot of different countries, right? Okay. So they're asking like, whoa, like where is he going? And then it says Jesus is yelling in a loud voice this idea that kind of like we talked about the woman at the well, this idea of water and like refreshing coming by the Holy Spirit. He says, if anyone's thirsty, come and drink, and rivers of living water will flow from within them. So Jesus is constantly pointing to this idea of water. Water is going, like, have you ever been really thirsty and you're just like, I don't know, think about the thirstiest day you've ever been, or like you've ever had. Like the day you're like, I like just anything, right? So Jesus is like, that's your spiritual state. And if you don't have me, then you need me. And I will give you rivers of living water that will satisfy you like you have no idea. And he's talking about the Spirit and how the Spirit, the Holy Spirit, the third person of the Trinity, indwells us and gives us new life and gives, newness and vitality to our lives. Okay, so what's also cool about this is there's a tradition that's happening at this time during the Feast of Tabernacles, in which the high priest would go down and get some water, I think from the pool of Siloam, and would take it up to the temple and pour it out. And this is like a symbol of saying, I think he would quote like Isaiah 12:3, basically just saying like the Messiah is referencing the Messiah, that he's going to give water essentially to like refresh his people. And so, and then they would sing some songs, and that would kind of be their tradition on this holiday. So it's interesting because Jesus during this holiday is saying, the water that you've been symbolically pouring out, that's like the water I want to give you spiritually. Okay. So then let's go down to verse 40. On hearing his words, some of the people said, surely this man is the prophet. Others said, he is the Messiah. Still others, how can the Messiah come from Galilee? Does not the scripture say the Messiah will come from David's descendants and from Bethlehem, the town where David lived? Thus the people were divided because of Jesus. Some wanted to seize him, but no one laid a hand on him. All right, so now people are very confused. So some people are like, hey, he's just a prophet. He's not the Son of God or the Messiah, but he's kind of like Elijah. And other people are like, no, he's the real deal, because we've never seen this many signs before. Okay, so, and then other people, they're disputing whether he is the Messiah because they keep getting hung up on this idea of him being from Galilee, right? So they're like, well, I thought he's supposed to be born in Bethlehem. Now, it's interesting because Jesus never says, you guys, I was born in Bethlehem. Like, he never tells them. He, like, lets the confusion just sit with them, right? And so you would kind of be like, hey, Jesus, just tell them you're from Bethlehem because that's where you were born. Kind of like, I don't know, do you remember like what hospital you were born at, right? And so it'd be like pretty easy to be like, hey, I was born at like this hospital, right? But like Jesus is just like quiet. It's like, why is he quiet? Why doesn't he just tell them that he's from Bethlehem? And I think it's because the people who are really going to follow him and believe that he's the Messiah, it doesn't really matter about like his origins, because it should be pretty obvious to them that he is the Messiah. Does that make sense? So it's interesting because Jesus is so controversial all the time. It could end this dispute so quickly, right? And just say, hey, I'm from Bethlehem, and people are like, oh. But anyway, so they're arguing. Okay, so they're arguing, and and it says still, some wanted to seize him, but they didn't lay a hand on him. Okay, this is the last part. So verse 45, finally the temple guards went back to the chief priests and the Pharisees, who asked them, why didn't you bring him in? No one ever spoke the way this man does. The guards replied, "You mean he has deceived you also?" The Pharisees retorted. "Have any of the rulers or the Pharisees believed in him? No, but this mob that knows nothing of the law, there's a curse on them." Nicodemus, who has gone to Jesus earlier, that's in John chapter 3, that's recorded, and who was one of their own number, asked, "Does our law condemn a man without first hearing him to find out what he has been doing?" They replied, "Are you from Galilee too? Look into it, and you will find that a prophet does not come out of Galilee." Okay, so now it's going to focus back on the religious leaders of the day, who again are the enemies of Jesus. And it's unexpected because you would kind of hope that the leaders of the religion would be on board with Jesus, but they're actually so far gone that they're the complete opposite and enemies of Jesus. But it shows that it's funny because they ask the guards, "Hey, I thought you were supposed to, like, we told you to bring Jesus and you didn't get him." And they're like, "Well, he kind of talks a lot different than the other people we've ever seen before," and they are not compelled to get Jesus. Okay, so then they're like, "Well, you've been deceived." And then even Nicodemus, who again we said had met with Jesus, even Nicodemus is like, "Shouldn't we like investigate a little bit more?" Because he's already kind of, it seems like he's kind of convinced that maybe Jesus is the Messiah, right? And then they're like, "Oh, you've been." It's just funny how like the Pharisees automatically just write off everyone, and they're just like, "Well, basically whoever's saying he's the Messiah doesn't understand the law, and they just don't know anything." I don't know if you caught that, but it says in verse 49, "But this mob who that knows nothing of the law." It's like they don't know anything. It's like we're not even going to grant them the fact that they might know a little bit. We're just going to say they know absolutely nothing. So they constantly are just like looking down on everyone. They're haters. They're the elitists, right? And they just keep getting hung up about this idea about Jesus being from Galilee. Okay. So what does this have to do with missing Jesus? Is that it's very possible to be religious but miss Jesus. Does that make sense? See, our world is changing pretty drastically, I would say. You guys don't need me to tell you that. I mean, just look at like AI and like you could play with ChatGPT or whatever. Like, there's an acceleration of information. It seems like geopolitics are rapidly changing and things are like getting a little creepy. Things are merging together. People want to merge with machines and technology, and people want to control stuff. And you got Agenda 2030 that's like, you'll own nothing and be happy. And like, you're like, what the heck is going on with the world, right? So there's a lot of weird stuff happening globally, right? Okay. Now, at the same time, there is, like Christianity is growing, like, in China or, Africa or South America, like God is on the move. And it does say that eventually the gospel is going to go out, or the good news about Jesus is going to go out throughout the entire world. Okay. So it's interesting how, like, as dark as things get, and we notice it even too in our country. Like, I mean, you've probably noticed like the darkness of our country, the content of our media, or how involved our nation is in like human trafficking, and there's just a lot happening in our country. Actually, it's funny because I don't read the Wall Street Journal typically, but my mom was like, "Oh, you should look at this article." And then, I don't know why, I was like, I'm just going to look at it this morning. And I was like, oh, I could use this in the sermon. So never be like, opposed to things that could come across your way. But it's interesting because 60% in 1998 said that they were that they consider religion to be of value to them. 60%. Now today, it's downwards of 40%. Okay. And in 1998, let's say community involvement was like at 40%. Now it's downwards of about 20%. Okay, so there seems to be a decline in the importance of faith, practices of faith, and also generationally speaking. I mean, you have the older generation who would say, 53% of them consider religious faith important to them, right? And then the new upcoming generation is 27%. So it's about half, right? So there's drastic changes as to what's happening in our country. All right. And it probably is wise to ask the question, why? Why is that happening, right? Now, it's interesting because, like I've said before, I've driven a lot for Uber, and bivocational, but as I drive people for Uber and I talk to people all the time, usually in Orange County, I used to do a little bit of driving outside of Orange County, but it's kind of a hassle, so I try to just stick around here. But usually when I talk to people, I mention that I'm a pastor. It's interesting because most people aren't like, all right, I'm done with this ride, or like, screw you, or like, I hate you, or like no one does anything or says anything weird like that. They're kind of like, they're polite. They're like, oh, okay, that's cool. So it's interesting because Orange County is known as like a very relatively Christian county. Yeah, compared to like you know, some of us are from LA. Yeah, LA is not as Christian by nature, but Orange County is like kind of known for being a place of a lot of Christian movement. You know, like the Jesus movement with Calvary Chapel, or you know, Saddleback, or you know, different church movements like that, right? Okay, so what's interesting about Orange County in particular is that it's a relatively churched area, but it's very de-churched too. Like a lot of people that grew up in the church are just not in the church anymore, right? So actually when I drive for Uber and I talk to people and I'll mention church or whatever, and they'll be like, oh yeah, I used to go to church, but like I grew up with it, but like I'm not into it now. And then, you know, I try to not be overly invasive, but yeah, sometimes you poke around. And it's interesting like why people say that, right? And it's interesting because people love Jesus. They're like, I love Jesus. You know, I love to have a personal relationship with Jesus. I just don't like the church. You know, I don't like the organized faith of the church. And they'll mention, you know, maybe like different church hurt experiences or things like that. And to which I can totally empathize with, because I mean, when you see stuff like the Roman Catholic Church having like all these, you know, pedophile, you know, occurrences, or like, you know, the Southern Baptist Convention having like all these scandals, it's like, why would I go to church if my kids are going to get violated, or you know, stuff like that, right? Or just people getting harmed in a lot of different ways. It's like, why would I go to a place that doesn't even look like Jesus, you know? So a lot of people leave the church, and I don't blame them. So I think that has a lot to do with Orange County. Specifically, Tustin is a hard place to do church. I didn't even know that. If I knew it was this hard, I wouldn't have like started it. But apparently the reputation for Tustin, as they talk to other pastors, they're like, there's actually like a spiritual stronghold in Tustin. I was like, what do you mean? You know, like, I'm thinking about it. But it's true, like there aren't that many churches here, even though there's like 80,000 people that live in this city and, you know, in the surrounding cities. But it's interesting because I was talking to a guy who could be a church planting mentor to me. He's like, yeah, we're looking into Tustin, but people were telling me not to plant there because there's like, you know, it's like spiritually really hard there. So we planted in Santa Ana instead. So anyway, I was like, wow, I wish I knew that. But I talked to my other friends who are planting in Tustin, and they all have issues too, right? So there's something about planting here. It's kind of hard to put your finger on, but some reason it's hard to start a church in this specific area. But the point is this, is that people love Jesus, but they don't necessarily like what Christians at times have done to the Bible or Jesus, right? And I think that explains a lot of the de-churchedness of the culture around us, okay? So I think the easiest way to think about it is like this, is that there's one day going to be a judgment, right? There's going to be a judgment between the sheep and the goats. And they're kind of similar. Like they're both like animals that can have horns and they're kind of furry, right? But like goats are different than sheep, right? So Jesus is saying like one day there's going to be a judgment where like metaphorically, like we're not going to change into goats or sheep, but like metaphorically, like goats and sheep are going to be separated. And it's essentially saying like the people that belong to Jesus, him being the good shepherd of the sheep, you know, will be with him, and then the goats will not be with him, right? Now, Jesus says that, like when he talks about being the good shepherd, that he already has sheep, like the Jewish people who are going to trust in Jesus as Messiah, and then he's also going to find the Gentiles who are also going to believe in him. Raise your hand if you're a Gentile. That means like you're not Jewish. Okay. That's like all of us. Okay, we got some work to do. We got to find. Gotta go get some. No, actually, no. That's. I don't want to say it like that. Never mind. Ignore that. So anyway, yeah. So we have a very Gentile church. We'll put it that way. Okay. So with regards to the sheep, you know, there are Jews and Gentiles, right? Okay. So what Jesus is saying is that there are goats, but the thing is, there are two different kinds of goats. Okay, so there are the goats who think they are followers of God, but they're not. And there are goats who definitely know they're not followers of God. We'll put it that way, right? Okay, so let's categorize that in two different ways. The folks who think they are of God are like the Pharisees. They're like the moralist people. They're the legalistic people. And these kinds of people, they believe that they can earn favor with God. If they just work hard enough, they have enough to prove to God, hey, I'm a good, righteous person, okay? So they think they can earn their salvation. And then you have the other goats who are, we'll call them relativists, who are just like, yeah, like I can live how I want and God's still going to accept me. You can think of it like Hinduism or like all roads lead to God or things like that, right? But, for both, Jesus he's opposed to the proud, or the people that say that they can achieve salvation on their own. And he's also telling the relativists, hey, I'm the only way, right? So amongst the goats, there are two different kinds, the relativists and the moralists. Okay. In my opinion, I think the reason why the church has lost its saltiness or its appeal is because the churches generally have been forgetting what the gospel is. And you might be saying, oh, that's kind of harsh, David. Like you're saying they're kind of forgetting like Jesus. But hear me out on this a little bit. Okay. So we said like for relativism, Christians can fall in the trap of both. Now, like if we're really a Christian, like we're really trusting alone in Jesus, turning away from our sin, then we're good, right? But it doesn't mean that we are immune from being affected by the world. Okay, so let's say I'm a Christian, but I start to slip a little bit on the truth. I start to make certain I don't know. Whatever the word is. What's the word? It's like I start to make certain excuses, or there's a word there that I'm not remembering at the moment. If it comes to you guys, let me know. But so we start to make like little excuses here and there for our sin, right? And eventually it can get to a point where like we're backsliding. Okay. So let's say, with my lying issue, I'd be like, oh, it's not that bad if I just white lie here and there. And then eventually I can get to a place where I'm just like blatantly, pathologically lying all the time, right? So there is a sense in which like there's what's called cheap grace. It's like, it's basically saying, hey, God, thank you for the salvation, and I'm going to live my life however I want to live, right? But we're bought at a price, so that means we don't get to live how we want to live, right? That means we're treating the precious, valuable, like infinite worth of God's grace through Christ as cheap, So when we're treating grace like that, Paul says like, should I sin in order that grace may abound? Like no. So for this attitude, It needs the word, it needs the Bible, it needs truth, it needs correction, right? And for this idea of relativism, it essentially is like grace without truth. Like I'm going to give grace to myself, grace to other people, but I'm going to compromise on the truth, right? Okay. And then the other side is legalism. The other kind of tendency that Christians can have is legalism. So these are the people that look down on you when you walk into church, and you're not wearing the clothes that they have, or your haircut's a little too edgy or whatever, or you put some dye in your hair, things like that. People start looking down on you. This kind of form of Christianity tends to be very condemning, right? So obviously we need to judge rightly. Like if we say human trafficking is bad, I'm not like it's not evil for me to judge that, saying that's evil, right? But it is bad if I'm like constantly condemning other people, condemning myself, or exalting myself over other people, right? So usually with this attitude of legalism, and we can all fall into either of these categories or temptations. With legalism, there's certainly a striving that happens. I'm gonna strive in my own effort to be as good of a person as I can. So usually what happens is we get really tired, we get exhausted. We also become pretty arrogant if we try that. Because if we succeed, then we feel really good about ourselves. If we fail, then we're going to really beat ourselves up, which is essentially pride, because we're not focusing on Jesus and we're focusing on ourselves. So legalism is essentially truth without grace. Like, I'm going to give you the Bible, but I'm not going to give you much grace. Like, you just need to do it, suck it up, deal with it, right? So that kind of Christianity produces people that you don't really want to be around, which is the case here that Jesus is dealing. Jesus is in a crowd of people that are moralists, and the people that are opposed to him are the legalistic people that, in my opinion, make Christianity look bad today, especially in our county. Okay, so what people don't like is hypocrisy, right? I don't like to be a hypocrite, and I don't really want to be around people that are hypocritical. So for all of us, we feel that way. There's a sense of like, I don't trust you, right? But the problem is that hypocrisy happens for both. See, if you're a relativist, you can be hypocritical because, let's say you like a lot of diversity, but maybe there are a few things you're not very diverse about, right? Or maybe you're a legalist and you'll like judge everyone, but you won't consider your own weaknesses and failures and faults, right? So in both cases, there's going to be hypocrisy, and Jesus is opposed to that, okay? Now, I'm going to just, kind of focus on legalism for a sec, but usually how this works in our lives are, some like red flags that I've noticed. A couple things. One is like haughty eyes. I'm not saying like your eyes are hot, but like H-A-U-G-H-T-Y. Yeah, haughty eyes. It's kind of like just slamming people in your mind. Just like, oh my gosh, their outfit, they look like trash. Or I don't know, whatever, it might come across your head. Like usually my haughty eyes, like what I don't vocalize out loud, in the past, and I mean sometimes like I really need to like watch it, is like, oh, that person looks like a dumb person or something like that. And I'm like, dude, okay, what the heck? Like, what is in me? It's like just like looking down on people, So it's like haughty eyes or gossip. It's like just like slamming people behind their back, Okay, so we all do that. Envy. It's like okay, well, this person has this. Why don't I have this? And there's a sense of entitlement. And usually with proud people, they are very defensive. So you try to like, even if you gently call them out, like, hey man, like the kind of language you're using is like kind of off, right? And they'll just go ballistic. So there's definitely a sense of defensiveness that happens when we're legalistic. There's narcissism. There's usually wrath and arrogance. Usually like a very critical spirit. They're just fake. Okay, so let's say you have a church full of people that are like that. They're narcissists. They look down on people. They're arrogant. They gossip about each other. They're very critical, very fake. They may look very holy. Is that a church you want to be at? Yeah, me neither. And that's why people are leaving a lot of churches, because they hear about it and they see the hypocrisy that's within it. And it often, it's kind of sad too, because a lot of these churches, they look very moral. So in other words, like, because they're moralists, they care about outside or outward behavior, right? But inside, they're full of dead men's bones. Like Jesus talks about them being like whitewashed tombs. Like, it looks really nice on the outside, but inside, it's like got a bunch of like dead stuff in it, right? So in other words, for a very legalistic church, like, you'll have people that look very good. It's like, oh, like I dress very modestly, or I never like swear in my language, or things like that look very appealing on the outside, but inside, and when you get to know some of these kinds of churches or the people in these churches, like, they're very divisive and slanderous and just cruel and rude, and it's like those are the things that Jesus was very like condemning about, because Jesus was. It was interesting because like Jesus will pursue like the worst of society, the prostitutes, the tax collectors, the naked guy in the graveyard who has a bunch of demons. Some of you don't know that story, but yeah. So there's that. Jesus will like go to the woman at the well. Jesus pursues like the people that are like the super relativists, and he generally gets along pretty well with them, and they like him because they're like, I'm so broken, help me, Lord Jesus. But he just doesn't get along with, and they don't get along with him, the Pharisees and the legalists. And it's really sad because a lot of, churches, sometimes they think, oh, we're so close to God and we love God, and, but they're like really far from God. but they can be so blind, hypocritical. Okay, so I noticed this particularly. Oh, sorry, I got to be mindful of the time. So I'm just like feeling it. But like, so I noticed it really badly in this one scenario because I didn't realize how this church was like shaping me, if you will. Kind of like, when you're in an environment, you don't necessarily like realize how it affects you until later. But I remember like Lauren and I went to a concert, and there was a girl who was singing on stage, and I don't know why, but I just started like judging her. Just like, I don't know why. I mean, I just started like looking down on her. Like, I don't know if it was like the way she dressed or something. And then like outside, she was like talking to someone, and she was like speaking in a, we'll say worldly way, right? So I'm just judging her. I don't even know this girl, right? I'm just like picking on her in my head. And what was so brutally humbling is that somehow she was actually, unbeknownst to me, a friend of one of our students in our youth group. And she actually came to our youth group without me knowing that she was going to be there. And I was like, oh, frick, what is going on here? And what was also ridiculous is that she was like the first one to become a Christian in the group. And I was just like, oh, Lord, something is really wrong with my heart, And I'm like, what is going on? And what I realized later, unfortunately too late, was that the church was already shaping me, just me being there. It was shaping my mentality, the way I would speak about people, the way I would look down on people. And I was like, frick, like I don't want to be like the people that Jesus didn't get along with, I want to be like the people that get along with Jesus, right? And so I was like, Lord, like I need to repent of this. I need to like stop. Jesus judges relativism. He doesn't treat it nicely. He's like, hey, if you hate someone in your heart, it's basically murder, right? So Jesus is like still like hard on, sin, but at the same time, his enemies were the religious ones who thought they knew God. Because I want the results of the gospel, and if we're honest with ourselves, I mean, we really want that too. We want that love, we want joy, we want graciousness, we want compassion. We want to be others focused. We want to be humble enough to like admit our faults, and we don't have to play this facade of our fake image. It's so exhausting to be a fake religious person, and so I don't want to be that way, and I don't think you guys either. So how do we know if we're falling into moralism? That's the question. Is like, how do we know that we're falling into moralism? And so I'm going to just read like some of this book, but it's kind of like a T-chart. So I'm going to like stand here and then go over here. Okay. So if we're into religion or like a fake kind of spirituality that Jesus is opposed to, it's saying, I obey, therefore I'm accepted. So I'm going to follow the rules. God approves of me. Okay. The gospel, or the good news about Jesus, gospel just means good news. The gospel is saying, I'm accepted by Christ, therefore I'll obey. Kind of like a child. Like you can say, to your son, like, hey, I want you to do this. And then your son says, hey, I obeyed. Like, therefore I'm like a good son. And you love me now. Or I could just like love my son, and they're going to be like, oh, I'll obey you, Dad, because I love you. It's totally different, right? So over here too, the motivation is based off of fear and insecurity. Oh, God, you're going to judge me. Or, oh, I want to feel like a better human being and have more self-worth, so I'm going to obey you. But over here, the motivation for when we're based in the gospel is that our motivation is based out of joy. Like it's a joy to walk and enjoy God. All right, over here, circumstances go wrong. I'm going to be angry at God, angry at myself, because I deserve a comfortable life. Why? Because I'm a good person, and God owes me this, right? But over here, when circumstances go wrong, I do struggle, but ultimately I know that my punishment fell on Jesus. So I'm not going to hold my fist at God and I can wrestle through, I can struggle through it, but I know ultimately like He loves me. And in the trial, God is going to shape me in a way that I wouldn't be shaped. Over here, if we get criticized, I'm devastated. My life's over. Oh, I got criticized. It's like we feel like a house of cards that fold. Because I think of myself as a good person. It threatens my self-image. But over here, I can take criticism. Why? Because my sense of worth isn't based on how good or bad I am. My sense of value is based on how much God loves me. And if He loves me and it's constant, well then I'll be relatively unaffected by people's criticism because it's not attached to my self-worth, right? Okay, so over here, for legalism, my prayer life is usually petition. like David praying for his biology test and stuff like that. It's like, oh Lord, help me with this, help me with this, help me with this. I need this, right? But over here, the prayer life is full of pursuit of a relationship with God, thankfulness, adoration, praise. The main purpose of prayer when we're focused in the gospel is just to be with God and enjoy him, okay? So it's not to use God to get stuff. Over here, for moralism, my self-view just is kind of bipolar. It swings from pole to pole. If I'm living up to my standards, I feel amazing. But if I'm not, then I feel like crap. I feel like a failure. But over here, if my self-worth isn't tied to being a moral achiever, but rather Jesus, who was the moral achiever for me and merited my salvation, then it allows me to be more and more humble, and I'm going to be rooted more in love. Okay, so two more. This other one is like my identity and self-worth are based on how hard I work. So when I see lazy people, I'm like, they're terrible people, right? You disdain, or like we disdain or feel superior to people. But if my identity and self-worth are not anchored to my performance, then I don't need to look down on other people who don't perform, right? If they're not performing, well, okay, neither was I. Okay, so we're all on the same playing field. Also, when I'm looking at my own like performance of spirituality, my moral record, this, as a moralist, this gives me my hope and my meaning and my security and my happiness, my sense of significance. But over here, the good things in my life, they're all like as a result of God. Okay, they're all grace. And also, like I know that the things that I do are not things that God receives. Let me give you an example. So like, theologians have this very deep term called good bad, which is essentially saying like without Christ, we can do good things, right? I mean, we could be generous, we can do different things, right? But in some sense, it's also the case that if we're not doing it for God, there's an element to which our deeds are lacking, right? So in other words, to be rooted in the gospel is something that that we'd like to do, we need to do, but honestly, I think a lot of the way we do Christianity is rooted in like a lot of self-effort, like a lot of straining on our own to try to be harder and do better and be a better person. So I'll just kind of show you this chart real quick. But this idea is kind of like this, like in order to be a better person, usually there's kind of this step one of like, I'm going to be determined. I'm going to work hard, like David Goggins, or I don't know, however, like whatever perseverance mentality you need in order to just like try harder. I'm going to be determined to be a holy person, right? And then if you succeed, oh, I'm so amazing. Yeah, right, okay. And then, but if I don't succeed, then I'm a failure, right? Okay, so if I and then I'm going to experience despair, and then I'm going to try harder, and then I'm going to fail again, and now I'm just going to be hardened and, constantly despairing, and then I'm going to feel guilt and shame. That sounds like a pretty miserable way to live, right? So, unfortunately, that is also how Paul talks about the Christian life, the life without Christ in Romans 7. He's saying, like, I can't do good. Like, even the good I want to do, I can't do it. So who's going to save me from this? And he's like, well, thank God for Jesus, because I can't do it on my own, all right? So regardless of whether we're more on the relativist side or more the legalistic side, what we need is a deeper belief and trust in the gospel. And I believe that is what will change us. That will change our soul. It will change the trajectory of our lives. And the gospel is very simple. It's essentially this, that Jesus accomplished our salvation on the cross with his death and resurrection. And when he did that, he removed our sin from us, but he's also constantly removing the effects of sin, and then one day it won't be there anymore, okay? So in Romans 5, 6-8, I won't have you turn there unless you want to, but it says this. This is essentially what the gospel is. You see, at just the right time, when we were still powerless, Christ died for the ungodly. Very rarely will anyone die for a righteous person, though for a good person someone might possibly dare to die. But God demonstrates his own love for us in this, that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Okay? So even, it's like, would you be willing to sacrifice yourself for a solid, heroic person, right? Yeah, maybe, right? But like, how about your enemy? How about like someone you don't like that's like wronged you a bunch? Like, probably not, right? But like, while we were still enemies of God, even though we didn't want anything to do with him, Jesus still dies for us. Yeah. And he did so because he wanted us and he loves us. Okay, so that's very different than religion, because everything is basing our salvation on God. Has anyone ever seen the movie Man on Fire? That movie's so dope. I love Denzel Washington movies because he just always kills everyone. I don't know, it's he can't stop him. But I mean, I try to. Well, actually, I was going to use The Sound of Freedom for my sermon reference today, but I assume some of you haven't seen it, so I didn't want to ruin it. But I'm going to use Man on Fire because you've had plenty of time to watch it. But Man on Fire is basically Denzel Washington has to rescue this girl that was basically traded for an amount of money, and there's a ransom. But he really cares about her. And so he just shoots a bunch of people, and it's pretty cool. But anyway, towards the end, it seems like all hope is lost, and we don't know what happened to her, right? But then he finds out she's actually alive, and so basically he goes to find her, but in order to get her back, it's a life for a life. So he actually has to die in order for her to come back home to mom, and so. So I love that picture because that's essentially what the gospel is. You have a savior who is trying to rescue this little girl who can't help herself, and in order to get her back, he has to give his own life for her. That's the great exchange. The great exchange is that we have a bad record. We have a million things we've done wrong in thought, word, and deed that God is opposed to, and there's nothing we can do to make up for it. Because it's on our permanent record, right? So we have a permanent record over here. And then you have Jesus over here who has done everything that we should have done. Loved people, forgave his enemies, fed people, never sinned, all that stuff. So he's got that record over here. And we're I want that record. So Jesus is I'll give you that record, but we need to trade places. So I'm going to trade places with you on the cross. I'm going to take on the wrath of God. And then when I'm done with that, and you're gonna trust in me alone for your salvation, you're gonna turn away from your sin, you're gonna be receiving the gospel. And when that happens, you get my record. So you're gonna place all of your sin on the Lamb Jesus, who's gonna take away the sin of us. And when that happens, we get a swap and we get his perfect record, right? And what's unfortunate about legalism, and we do this, is that we try to add little addendums to what Jesus already did for us, and we try to feel better about our lives, even though our life is already a success, because Jesus is the victor. So we don't need to try to prove our sense of worth through our moral effort or our successes or anything, because we already have everything in Jesus. So that's what I mean when I'm saying we have to believe the gospel more, which is I don't have to prove anything to anyone or do anything for myself anymore, because Jesus already lived the perfect life I should have lived, and he died the death I should have died. So now my life is complete. Now I can just live my life in that freedom. I'm going to wrap up here in a little bit. Thanks for your patience. I just, there's a lot of content here. But so in other words, sometimes in churches you'll get a very simplified gospel, which is essentially saying we've fallen and we screwed everything up. Jesus came and saved us, right? You're woo, that's okay, cool. And then we need a more fleshed out gospel, which is in creation, God is a good God who made a perfect world. And then we screwed it up, even though God didn't want us to screw it up. And now because the world is screwed up, you have rape and murder and people stealing lots of money, or all of us doing all the sins that we've done and things like that, right? So now we have this fallen, broken world. Jesus comes in and redeems us by dying on the cross for us and saving us. And then one day, he is going to renew everything. So there's going to be new heavens and new earth. We're going to have earth again. Picture earth again, because I like earth. Earth is pretty dope. But without all the bad stuff, right? So I'm not going to die. No one's going to sin against me. I'm not going to sin against anyone. But I get the earth again. Get to be with God. It's going to be heaven. That's what heaven is. It's not just floating in the clouds playing a harp with a loincloth or whatever you see in paintings. But it's a new heaven and a new earth, and it's going to be awesome. Okay, but in between that, some people are oh, well, okay, so I just accept Jesus and then I just wait till I die. Is that I got my ticket now and I'm just chill till I die, right? There is this other part this step before God changes everything, which is where we are soldiers in a broken world, and we are invading this territory taken over by Satan, and we are trying to start pockets of God's kingdom, okay? And we're advancing it through the good news about Jesus. So that's what you and I are partnering in. We are trying to bring the gospel to Tustin and the surrounding cities of Orange County. We are trying to we need God to change us. We need the gospel to be beautiful to us. And when it is, we can make it seem beautiful to other people because of what we say and how we live our lives. And dang, I want that. I want that Jesus that you got. I want me some Jesus. And that church you go to, you guys are a lot like Jesus. Okay, I actually want to go to your church. I don't think church, being a part of a church isn't too complicated. I think it's just do you guys look like Jesus or not? If you don't, I don't want to have anything to do with you, right? Okay, so I don't think it's that hard, but we, again, as Christians, we need the gospel just as much as non-Christians do. We need it daily. We need to be constantly reminded of the depths of the gospel and the truths of the gospel, and that this is what really changes us. It keeps us on the straight and narrow, not falling, into moralism or relativism. Okay, and the reason why we drift into relativism is because we forget how costly it was for Jesus to die for us. Because if we're treating his grace as cheap, we're forgetting how painful it was, what it cost the Father to give up his only Son. We start to forget the weight of that cost, right? And also, if you're drifting too much into moralism, we're forgetting that we didn't contribute anything good to our salvation. The only thing we contributed was our sin that made our salvation necessary. Okay, so in other words, we have nothing to boast about. That's what's beautiful about the real version of Christianity, is that it makes genuinely humble and loving people when it actually works. And when people pervert it and they look really arrogant and condemning, no one wants to be a part of those churches or join that kind of faith, and so they'll leave it. And I don't blame people, okay? So my encouragement to us is to believe the real gospel and let the real Jesus change us. So let me pray, and then I want to have Griffin come up, and then we'll have do some communion. Thanks for tolerating a longer sermon. Lord, thank you for this time, and thank you for your word. I pray, God, that we would be people who are so in love with you. I pray that our love for you would be the fuel that helps us to live the Christian life. And we don't have to strain, we don't have to earn, we don't have to prove, we don't have to feel superior to people, we don't have to feel inferior, like a self-deprecating kind of pride. But I pray, God, that it would cultivate the real, genuine love of Jesus in our hearts. And pray this in your name. Amen.